Have you ever stopped to think about what really happened in the Garden of Eden? Was the fall of man just a mistake, a simple transgression? Or is there something much deeper at play? If you think you know everything about original sin, think again. The story you know, with Adam and Eve, the serpent, and the tree, is only the surface of a far more complex and revealing mystery. What lies behind the choices of Adam and Eve? What does the Bible really say about the origin of sin? And more importantly, what does it have to do with your life here and now? The hidden truth of Eden is not just about the past. It speaks to the present, and it will change the way you see the world and even yourself. Get ready to uncover the secrets hidden in the pages of Genesis that reveal much more than you imagine. The Garden of Eden was not just a perfect setting. It represented the original harmony between God, humanity, and all of creation. Imagine a place where everything was aligned, where every being, from the greatest animal to the tiniest plant, lived in perfect harmony. There was no division, no pain or fear. It was the manifestation of God's will, where humans not only lived, but experienced true intimacy with their Creator. Eden was more than a physical place. It was a state of communion, where man walked alongside God. If we stop to reflect, this is the kind of relationship we all, in some way, long for. A deep connection with God, a life with purpose, and a freedom unburdened by what we carry today. Of course, when we talk about Eden, we can't ignore the symbolism that this place carries. When the Bible speaks of the Garden of Eden, it isn't merely describing geography. Eden is God's original plan for humanity. It's the starting point of our existence, where man was created in God's image and placed in an environment where he could work with purpose, enjoy joy, and have the freedom to choose. In that environment, we can see the reflection of a deep longing we still feel today. The nostalgia for what was lost. That harmony, that sense of belonging, that clear purpose in each step taken. All of it is something we search for, even unconsciously, throughout our lives. Yet, as we well know, the story of Eden does not end in pure perfection. As we study Genesis, we begin to realize that something breaks in this perfect relationship, and the transition from Eden to what comes after invites us to reflect on free will and the role we play in choosing the direction of our lives. The story of Eden is much more than an ancient tale of a lost paradise. It's a mirror of the choices we make today. And maybe, by understanding what happened in Eden, we can begin to perceive what is truly at stake in our own decisions. And that's where the tree of the knowledge of good and evil comes into the picture, inviting us to reflect on free will. What might that tree represent for us today? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden was not a trap set to make man fall, but a point of decision. It was a divine invitation to free will, to the freedom of choice. God, by placing that tree at the center of Eden, was not creating an endless temptation, but giving humanity the power to decide for itself. Free will is, in fact, one of the greatest gifts God has given us. The ability to choose is what makes us human, and at the same time, it is that same freedom that can lead us to either good or evil. What happens in the story of Adam and Eve continues to challenge us today. Choosing what is right requires commitment, courage, and love. When God told Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree, he wasn't imposing an arbitrary rule. His command came from a desire to protect them, to preserve Eden's harmony. Obedience was not a burden, but an invitation to love and trust. In our everyday lives, this makes us think. How often are we, in our own choices, being invited to trust in something greater, something beyond what we see ahead? True obedience, as God asked of Adam and Eve, is not a prison, but an expression of love and gratitude. The relationship with God was never about empty rules, but about surrendering to His purpose, trusting His goodness, and acting according to His divine plan. And here begins the key to understanding original sin. What happened in Eden was not simply a bite from an apple. It was an act of disobedience born from the doubt sown by the serpent, but also from the desire to be like God. Sin entered the world not because Adam and Eve immediately gave in to temptation, but because, for a moment, they chose to step away from complete trust in God. Their choice was ultimately a decision to live without limits, to try to know good and evil without depending on God. And that decision continues to echo in our lives today. How often, in our own moments of doubt, do we choose paths that seem easier or more attractive, but which lead us away from God's purpose for us? The seed of doubt had been planted, and the serpent was beginning to play its role in the story of sin. The serpent in the Garden of Eden was not just an animal, but a powerful symbol of doubt and the distortion of truth. Its first question, "Did God really say that?" marks the starting point of the fall, the seed of sin. The serpent did not attack with force or violence, but with words, with a subtle and persuasive doubt. It didn't directly challenge God's authority, but led Eve to question, to wonder whether God's command truly made sense. The doubt did not arrive with a shout, but with a whisper, an invitation to reconsider what was already clear. And in the moment that trust in God falters, the path to sin becomes clearer, easier to follow. Sin did not begin with an external act, but with an internal transformation. Doubt was what opened the door to original sin. By listening to the serpent, Eve did not just question God, she also began to doubt her own place in the garden, her relationship with her Creator. The story of original sin becomes, then, a deep reflection on how doubt can corrupt even the simplest and most natural of choices. In everyday life, we all face doubt. Does God really want what's best for me? Is this choice really the right one? The temptation to act on our own, without listening to God, is a constant struggle. Like Eve, we may be drawn in by promises of power or freedom, without considering the spiritual consequences they bring. When doubt is sown, decisions begin to be made the wrong way, and sin enters the heart. The serpent knew that by distorting the truth, it would create a breach in the trust between man and God. This is the crucial point of the story. Sin did not arise from a lack of knowledge, but from a lack of trust in God. Today, how often does doubt lead us to question what we already know to be right? The doubt that began with the serpent in the garden still acts in our hearts and minds today, leading us to question even the promises God has made. That is the great mystery of sin, how it can be born from a single doubt, but result in a deep rupture in our relationship with God and with others. The fall of man does not just mark the end of innocence, it marks the beginning of a long story of redemption. By disobeying God, Adam and Eve opened the door to a new world, a world marked by suffering, pain, and separation. Original sin immediately shattered the perfect harmony that existed in Eden and brought spiritual, emotional, and physical consequences upon humanity. The separation from God, who once walked with man in the garden, was now a painful and irreversible reality. Death entered the world, not just as a physical reality, but as spiritual death, separating man from his Creator. And this separation affects us even today, in our relationship with God, with others, and even with ourselves. Yet even in that moment of judgment, God's grace was not extinguished. Genesis 3 verse 15 brings a promise, the offspring of the woman, who would come to crush the serpent's head. Even in the judgment, God revealed his intention to restore what had been lost. The promise of redemption was planted immediately after the fall, offering hope, a future of reconciliation with him. So the fall was not the end of the story, but the beginning of God's great plan to restore humanity, a plan that would culminate in the coming of Jesus Christ. That promise, which seemed small and distant at the time, was the starting point for the salvation of all humanity. The fall and its consequences teach us that even in life's darkest moments, there is always a seed of hope. Even when the choices we make lead us away from God, He never abandons the promise of redemption. This doesn't mean the consequences of sin aren't real. They are. But it also means that even in the face of pain, there is a promise of restoration, a promise that calls us to look beyond the present moment and trust that God has a greater plan for us. The battle between good and evil began in the Garden of Eden, but its resolution, with Christ's victory over sin and death, is still unfolding. Now that you've uncovered the mysteries of the fall in Eden, let me ask you, how does this change your view of life? Do you understand the impact of original sin on our world and your personal journey? The story of Adam, Eve, and the serpent is not far from us. It echoes in our daily choices, in the doubts we face, in the temptations that arise. From now on, do you see good and evil in a deeper way? So what will you do with this knowledge? Will you continue living as if nothing has changed? Or will you begin to see life from a new perspective, more aware of the consequences of your actions? I invite you to reflect on this, and to continue this journey of discovery. Subscribe to the channel Faith Between the Lines, turn on notifications, and come explore more of the Bible explained, from Genesis to Revelation. Don't miss the upcoming videos, where we'll dive even deeper into divine secrets and teachings.